told you there was one key update you could make to your capabilities deck to instantly build more confidence with your prospects so that they're more inclined to want to work with you and you can start closing more deals. And that one key update is adding verifiable proof. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through the different types of proof you can add to your capabilities deck and how to add that proof in a way that instantaneously builds the kind of trust that makes prospects eager to work with you. So when you start talking about the power of proof in your capabilities deck, what you really want to do is focus on four key areas. And those areas are logos. So that's basically your logo quilt or the page that shows all the logos of the clients and brands that you've previously worked with. And what that does is it gives you credibility at a glance. So basically your prospect is looking at that page, they're seeing all these logos, all these brands you work with. And so they're beginning to understand that you've done this work for people in the past, and they're beginning to see, how many clients have you worked with, the types of clients you work with, et cetera. Next, case studies. Case studies are obviously super powerful. This is when you dive deeper into the work you've done for clients, the projects that you've done, the results that you've been able to get, the specifics behind, the work that you're doing through showing them stories and data. So this is a really powerful way to add proof to your deck. And then you want to follow that up with any kind of press coverage. And what's great about press coverage is that it's objective third-party proof. So, whether it's press about a client, some work you did for a client, or it's press about your agency, as a standalone entity, press is great because it's already verified, it's third party, a journalist covered some aspect of what you do or your agency. And so that's a really strong way to add proof to your deck. And then fourth is testimonials. So the authentic voice of your clients talking about what you do, talking about the results you got for them and the business impact that you had. So that's super important. And then just another way to layer in those proof points. And so when you stack all these together, I like to call these the proof stack. You basically create this like undeniable evidence that your agency delivers. And so I'm going to dive deeper into that. But, you really want to start thinking about what proof points do you have across all the different projects that you worked on. And so how can you start to kind of build and tell that story in your deck? And what most agencies tend to get wrong about proof is that they kind of fill their deck with these generic statements. So, we deliver results, we can do it for half the cost, we care about our clients, we're industry leaders. But honestly, the truth is that, prospects are skeptical by default. They see tons of decks, they've heard it all before, and they don't really care about your opinion about your agency. What they're more focused on is trust and building that understanding that what you're saying in your deck and the claims that you're making are actually true and provable. So, like I said, prospects are skeptical by default. The only thing that actually builds that trust is objective proof. And that's really proof that can be verified out in the world. They can fact check it if they want to. So, think about if you're buying something on Amazon, do you read just the product description and just look at the photos, or do you go to the reviews? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to the reviews, you're going to see what other people had to say about the product, and you just want that added validation of understanding that what you're seeing is actually what you're getting. So proof is definitely something that is much stronger when it's coming from third parties or other sources, especially third parties that are like verified. So for example, and we'll get into this. I mentioned before, press is great because, a journalist or a media outlet is going out, doing their research, covering you or the work that you've done for a client. And so that's verified by a third party. So, prospects want to be able to trust what you have in your deck. And so it's important to have that verifiable proof. And the agencies that are closing bigger deals, they're able to show this proof, not just tell, and they're able to show the verification. So whether that's, like I mentioned, press, awards, testimonials, these are the things that start to really build that proof stack in your deck and really validate, like I said, that you can do what you say you do. So think show, don't tell. Think show that you've solved this exact problem for people and clients before, so that prospects understand that you're an agency that understands their problem, can solve it, has solved it before, and has solved it in ways that are verifiable. So yeah, let's get into the 3 types of objective proof. So the first one is logo quilts. I touched on this briefly. So this is the quilt of logos that shows all the brands you've worked with in the past. And this is important because, essentially you're saying I've worked with these brands, and now, the prospect on the other end of your pitch is like, great, these are, they may know the brands, they may be validated in some way. And now, the natural next step is that they want to see kind of the work that you did for that brand. So especially if you have big brands on your logo quilt, I always encourage you to include case studies for those brands so that the prospect can kind of connect the dots. So, I always like to use Nike as an example because I always see like the Nike logo on capability sticks that come across my desk. And, my whole thing is if you show the Nike logo in your logo quilt, you better be ready to show that corresponding case study so that the prospect can see, okay, they say they work for Nike. Here's the work they actually did. Now that's a proof point. Now it's verified that you did work for Nike. So, just always be thinking, how can I validate this? How can I verify this further? And, a lot of agencies I see will have these huge organizations or brands on their logo quilt, and then no case studies to back that up. No examples of the work they did for those clients. And so having those clients doesn't pack as much of a punch because the prospect isn't able to verify the work that you did for them. So the goal is to show the logo, show the work. We're going to kind of get into case studies as well, but you want to just keep it a natural progression where every dot is connected for the prospect. If you say you helped Nike increase brand engagement by 47% with this social media campaign, how are you showing that? How are you proving that in your deck? Show actual creative from the campaign, show screenshots of the social engagement, positive sentiment, positive comments, maybe back end analytics, screenshots of that. And like even better, if you have a reporting tool or some type of tool that's showing the increase in engagement, preferably a 40% increase shown right in the tool, that's going to validate what you're saying even more. So again, just always think, how can I verify this? You might not always have all the data points that you need, but that's something to really think about as you go into new client projects. How can you be tracking and capturing those important data points, in the background so that when the project wraps and you're done, you're able to build out a really robust case study. But just in general, always be thinking, as you're putting something on the page, especially a result, especially a logo, how can you validate, that in the eyes of the prospect? And so another great way you can validate what you're doing is with press coverage. And like press coverage, I mentioned before, it's great. It's pure gold. It's verified by a third party outlet. If Forbes writes something about your client, sold out in 72 hours, not only is that a great look for you, it's like validated out in the world. So you just screenshot that press clipping, you can drop it in your capabilities deck, you can link out to that Forbes article. And now, for your prospect, that's a fact-checked piece of information and they can really trust that. So press is obviously just a great, strong way that you can really, really, really strengthen your deck. I always encourage you to, if you're in a realm where press hits are happening about your clients or the work that you're doing, grab those screenshots, grab those links, and make sure you're dropping them in your deck and linking out to those sources, third party, so that as prospects are going through their deck, they can click out and read the full article if they want to. And specifically for agencies that actually do press work, like you do PR for people or brands, again, you really want to include those press clippings, however many you can naturally fit on the page. Obviously lead into the biggest outlets that you've gotten coverage on or press hits for. But like, when you say you do press, the people that are looking at your deck are going to want to see that you do press. So for those types of agencies that do PR, it's even more important. Just keep in mind that press is obviously time stamped. So, you want to keep your case studies fresh and relevant. I wouldn't go further back than maybe 3 years. So just think about that when you're pulling press and, expect prospects to click through to that article and to be able to see when that article was actually went live. But, it's just important that, when you're talking about proof stacking, these kind of third party validated, clips and links, those are going to be super important and just help level up the credibility in your deck and build trust with the prospect on the other end of the pitch. And then the next big one is obviously testimonials. And we talked about this. So testimonials are huge because they're basically, like I said, the authentic voice of your client. So this is your clients, talking in their own words about what you did. Now, there are different types of testimonials. Some are written, some are video. Video are obviously more powerful because they're hearing it from the client in front of them talking, versus depending and, relying on the fact that your written testimonial is accurate, it's valid, it's real, etc. So in general, testimonials are slightly less, verifiable than like, your logo quilt and your press, unless they're video testimonials. So keep that in mind, but they're still super, super powerful. They're the social proof that somebody trusted you and it worked out. And that's just something really powerful when you're talking to a human being on the other side of the pitch and letting them know that, other human beings in their position worked with you and the engagement went well. And I always say to really punch up, the testimonial and make it really pack as much of a punch as possible, you want to pair it with a face, a name, a title, and then really extract, like maybe they gave you kind of like a long blurb, about the work they did with you. You really want to extract the really most potent part of that testimonial. So, I gave an example of like, a lot of times my clients will reach out to their clients and try to get testimonials and they'll get generic statements like, it was great to work with you. Working with, XYZ was such a joy. They were so amazing to work with. Those generic testimonials don't really do anything for you. They don't really give any context to the prospect that you're pitching as far as like what you did, what the business impact was, et cetera. So, I included here another example of a much more in-depth testimonial. So, before working with agency, we were struggling with lead generation, brand positioning, and converting enterprise clients. In 6 months, they helped us 3x our qualified leads and land our first 7-figure contract. And then I have Sarah Johnson, CMO, TechStart Inc. So as you can see, this testimonial is a lot more clear. It shows exactly what the person did for them, what the agency did for them, and then what the business impact was them. And then it's paired with her name, her title, her company, and then in the design of the deck, a headshot to go along. So showing this person, Sarah Johnson, will make this testimonial pack even more of a punch. So you really want a specific person, a specific challenge, a specific outcome. And then, like I said, bonus points if you can add the headshot. It just humanizes the statement and will make the prospect on the other end of the pitch just connect more with that testimonial, what they're seeing and the person behind it. So it's not about stacking a bunch of generic praise. It really is about showing the prospect, like, these people had the same challenges that you do, and like, here's how we help them win. So that again will increase that confidence. And once that confidence is built in you, that trust is built in you, it will definitely help you as far as closing more deals. And so let's talk about bringing it all together. So you bring it all together, and you typically do that in the form of a case study. But you want your deck to move beyond here's what we do, and instead said here's what we've done and how it can work for you. So that's where you want to have the logo quilt, and then backed up by powerful case studies that tie back to the big brands in that logo quilt, or the most recognizable brands in that logo quilt. And so the formula is really start with the logo quilt, establish that credibility at a glance. They're seeing who you worked with, they're seeing these names, they're excited, they're building trust. Like, okay, they worked with some good people, brands and companies that are like mine. And then you want to connect those logos directly to the case study. So within each case study, obviously you're talking about what you did, the challenge, the results you were able to get. I do tons of videos on this channel that break down case studies, and there's a guide linked below where you can, I walk you through step by step what to put on each page, and it has a detailed breakdown of, what to put in each case study. But, once you have all of those key elements of the case study, you really want to layer in any press coverage. Like I mentioned, that's huge. I would drop those links directly on the page and link out to them so that the prospect can click through to read those articles online. And then you want to layer in the testimonial. So the quote from the person, their headshot, their name, their title. So all of those together, all of that verifiable information then is kind of tied together and strengthening the overall results that you've already put on that case study page. So any, metrics, screenshots, proof points, anything you can show that ties it all together. Like I mentioned before, if you say, we were doing social media engagement and we increased it by 47%, show screenshots of that engagement, show the post online, link out to those posts where they live online so that, the prospect can say, okay, here's the post. Oh, wow, here it is live on Instagram. They can scroll, they can see how many likes and comments and shares it got. And so again, this is verifying the information in your deck and making it really clear that what you're putting in your deck is real, it's validated, this is real work that you've done. You can go see it out in the wild, I call it, on the web, whether it's press, whether it's social, whether it's, you did a winning, YouTube video for a brand, here's the video. So, in some cases, you might not have that type of work where it lives online, which is fine. In some cases you might. So if you do, I would link out to it, but just always think, how can I verify what's on this page? How can I validate it for the prospect? If they wanted to fact check it, how can I get ahead of them fact checking it by essentially doing it for them with the content that I'm putting on this page? And when you do this, your deck really stops becoming like a list of claims, which is essentially what it is without this verifiable proof. It becomes this gallery of kind of like undeniable evidence. So like every logo that you have, every case study, every testimonial is kind of working together to show your prospect, like I said, that, you do what you say you can do. And you've done it before for, this person, this person, this person, as expressed through the logo quilt and the case studies that you're showing. So that's the kind of social proof that builds trust. If your capabilities deck doesn't have that, you're definitely leaving money on the table. And this is a great way to look at your existing deck and really start to move things around, beef things up. Like if your case studies are feeling light, aren't feeling validated, aren't feeling compelling, like this is a great way to really dive back into those and to start really leveling those up by adding in some of these elements. Again, trying to keep everything that you did for each client on one page, maybe two if you really need to, but keeping that holistic story on one page and stacking as much proof as possible. So as far as an action step, I would audit your current deck, like how much of your social proof or your proof in general is actually verifiable. If the answer is not much, I would go fix that first. And again, think back to your projects. Are you missing press hits? Are you missing metrics? What are you missing from these projects that you can bring onto the page? And, if you're going into new client projects, like I said, how can you get ahead of creating these types of case studies? What metrics do you want to track? What do you need to be pulling as the project is going on and kind of putting, in the bank, so to speak, so that when you create this case study slide later, you're easily just pulling everything onto the page. It's already all in a folder ready to go. So just really think through that. And if you really want to kind of dive deeper into this, I'm linking to my school community in the description down below. We dive so deep into all things capabilities decks. It's a great way if you want to just kind of reset, have some accountability. It's basically, 6 weeks to complete a capabilities deck. We have weekly calls, we have all kinds of support and resources in there. But this is a great way if you really know that you need to level up your capabilities deck across the board, including proof points, and you just want that kind of accountability and support, a lot of one-on-one attention. I can look at your deck, I can give you feedback. The community is amazing. There are tons of agency owners in there kind of fighting the same fight. So you can get a lot of feedback from people. So it's a great place if you want to level up your capabilities deck. And so those are the proof points that you need to include in your deck to really convince prospects that you can deliver. But I mean, obviously, proof points are just one piece in the larger puzzle of how your deck is structured, how it flows, etc. And I've analyzed hundreds and hundreds of capabilities decks. And at this point, I can tell in the first 3 to 4 to 5 slides which ones are going to win and which ones aren't. So if you want a little bit more guidance on your overall deck and how to kind of inject those proof points into it in a way that's really compelling, check out this video where I talk about winning capabilities decks and what they're doing differently.